Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, we're going to be talking about dissociative identity disorder. I am joined by author and facilitator of writing workshops and memoir classes for people with dissociative disorder. Her name is Lyn Barrett. Lyn suffered from this disorder as well. And as she told me in the green room, she wants to spend a lot of time on talking about what it is because it is misunderstood. So she wants to make sure that people get a clear understanding. And she will also be talking about her books and how her classes and workshop help people with dissociative disorder. So Lyn, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Curtis. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak with you and to speak with your audience about this disorder, dissociative identity disorder. And I'm really hoping to be able to set the record straight so that people have a better understanding of what it's all about.
Well, before we get into that, why don't you start off by kind of telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am a retired school teacher, school principal, and pastor. In my retirement, I have been writing my memoir. It's called Crazy: Reclaiming Life from the Shadow of Traumatic Memory. And it will be released for publication on January 3rd, 2022. It's up for pre-order right now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, so anyone who's interested in it can go there and pre-order. So I've been writing my memoir, and I have also been writing a weekly blog and sending out a weekly newsletter about living with dissociative identity disorder. The blog is meant to be inspirational because the disorder can be very debilitating and discouraging. And because I have lived through that and I've come out the other end, I want to inspire people that they can live another day and they can get healthier and they can create their life over the course of time. So those are the things that I have been doing in the years since I have been retired. I was diagnosed with multiple personality disorder in 1992. Multiple personality disorder was the name that was used up until 1994 when the name was changed to dissociative identity disorder. And I spent about 20 years of my life in really incredible confusion and pain, suicidal ideation, and many other symptoms that I could describe more in depth if you would want me to. But just to say that I was experiencing all these symptoms at the same time that I was a school teacher and that I was a school principal. And that was certainly a challenge.
Well, tell everybody what dissociative identity disorder is. You said you wanted to spend some time on that. So tell us what it is and how it's misunderstood in society.
Yes. Well, dissociative identity disorder is sometimes sensationalized in TV and movies, but it really is the brain's normal functioning in small children when they experience chronic childhood trauma and abuse. So I'd like to explain to you first what dissociation is. We all dissociate sometimes. Sometimes we daydream, or our thoughts kind of disconnect from our bodies because we're listening to a boring lecture, or we're so intent on something that we're doing that we don't really connect ourselves to our bodies, and that's very normal. So that's what dissociation is. But dissociation can also be the body's defense against pain and trauma. And so war veterans with PTSD come home and they dissociate. Rape victims dissociate because they need to have some distance from whatever the pain was that they experienced, and in many cases actually forget it. So dissociative identity disorder happens in very small children, probably up through the age of 8, while the brain is still being formed. It's not fully matured yet. And what the child does is sort of split off some awareness or memory into a part of the brain, so they can go back and live their life with their families and act as if nothing is wrong. And that's because little children need to know that their caregivers will take care of them because they don't have the capacity to do that themselves. So if a caregiver is hurting them on a regular basis, what they might do is sort of cordon off some of their consciousness or awareness into one part of their brain so that another part of their brain can go out there and act like nothing's happened, because they really can't know what happened. It would be too much for them. So over time, those parts of the brain get there are strong boundaries between those parts of our brain, and it helps to protect us. It's very functional in the small child, but when we grow up as adults, it's no longer functional. It's very dysfunctional, because we don't remember much of what happened, but we know that something's happened because of the kind of symptoms that we experience. I guess the main takeaways here are that dissociative identity disorder is caused by chronic childhood abuse and trauma in the very young child, and that it's functional for the young child, but it's dysfunctional for the adult. And so the adult has to address the symptoms and find therapeutic help that will enable them to heal from the trauma and also heal the parts that have split off and have made their life a little bit confusing because they're not certain of what's happening. I would go back, though, and say that our parts save our lives. So even when our parts are kind of difficult to deal with, that they are still parts of us, and they're parts of us that we need to get to know and to learn to love.
Well, tell us about when you realized that you had dissociative identity disorder, and you said you could go kind of into a little deeper dive of the symptoms that you had and talk about the challenges that you face trying to live everyday life, especially as a school teacher and a principal, because as you know, kids require a lot of patience.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, my parts were very collaborative. So as an adolescent and as a young adult, I was not aware that they existed. And although as a young child and adolescent, I always felt like I was defective, I didn't understand why. I managed to create a good life for myself. I went to college and graduated. I married a man that I thought was a good man, and we had 4 children. I became a very happy and fulfilled stay-at-home mom. And so my family was my life. At about the age of somewhere between the age of 35 and 39, that started to peel away, and I didn't know why. I started to have triggers, but I didn't know what triggers were, so I didn't know what that meant. And I started to feel unreal, as if I were up in the corner of the ceiling looking down on this woman going through life who was feeling a lot of pain. I found that my emotions and my thinking didn't match, that I had multiple strains of consciousness going on that seemed to conflict with one another. I had a lot of body pain. It really is what we call body memory. And I didn't know where that was coming from. Sometimes I would roll up into a fetal position and I would experience catatonia, where I would just stare out into space. I had a lot of suicidal ideation. And in fact, I attempted suicide at one point. But the piece that really broke everything open was when I discovered that my husband had been having an affair. And I want to make it very clear that his affair did not cause my dissociative identity disorder, but that affair was a betrayal that mimicked my early childhood betrayal. And so my parts were no longer safe. And they split apart and made themselves known, even though at the time I didn't understand that they were parts and I didn't believe that they were parts. That's in fact what was happening. And so at this point, I was teaching in a Quaker school. I attempted suicide. Was in the midst of my suicide attempt, another part of me came up and said, "No, you're not going to die," and called someone, so that I was not successful at suicide, for which I'm quite grateful. But at the time I wasn't, of course. And then I would say about 2 years after that, I finally, that time I was the head of a Quaker school, which is another word for principal. And I realized I could not continue in school leadership because I was so emotionally unglued. And so I had submitted my resignation, and then I admitted myself to the women's unit of a psychiatric hospital for 30 days. Many people with DID, dissociative identity disorder, experience hospitalization, and often it's really a horror story. Fortunately for me, it was not a horror story, and the unit was very supportive. I did not know at that time that I had DID, and when I went into the hospital, everyone inside quieted down, and I was able to get stabilized. I came out of the hospital and I moved because I had to take another job. I was a teacher in a public school, and I found a new therapist, and it was in that setting that my parts began to introduce themselves to me on a regular basis. I still did not believe that I had multiple personality disorder, and so I said that I would like to have a second opinion, and I went to a psychiatrist that had been affiliated with the hospital I was in, and he too confirmed the diagnosis that I had multiple personality disorder, which of course is now called dissociative identity disorder.
Well, your road to recovery also included a faith component. Talk about that as well and how that helped you.
Sure. So I was raised to be an atheist. My parents did not believe in God. My father used to tell us that people who believe in God are either stupid or weak. And so I didn't want to be stupid or weak. And besides, our parents are God for us when we're very young. And so I did not believe in God. I was an atheist too. But from a very, very young age, I had stirrings inside of me and yearnings for God. But I didn't know what to do with them because my family culture told me not to believe in this. And so the man that I married also was an atheist. And so we raised our children that way. And atheism it really can be almost a religion in and of itself. As I began to decompensate from dissociative identity disorder, I was my existence was really tentative. It was really hard to make it through every day. And I began to pray, even though I didn't believe in God, because just the simple act of praying helped to keep me alive. And my prayer was just, God, give me strength and wisdom. God, give me strength and wisdom. And I noticed after about a year, I didn't expect to have anybody or any God answer my prayer. But about a year later, I looked back and I thought, well, I am getting a little bit stronger, and I think I'm learning things too. So maybe God is answering my prayer. But it took a while. I still didn't believe in God, and it took a number of years for all of that to come together. I began, because I was teaching and then leading a Quaker school, I began in Quaker meditative silence, and that was very healing for me. And then eventually I went to the United Church of Christ, which also fed my need for liturgy and word. And so all of that really was side by side with my healing. I can't tell you exactly how they're connected, Curtis, excepting that I know that they are, that I know that this growing faith was connected to my growing healing, and that without that faith, I don't know if I could have made it. Ultimately, I went to seminary and I was ordained in the United Church of Christ and served two churches before I retired. So I give God great thanks. For those of your listeners who may not have faith, I respect that, because I understand that we all come from different places, and I certainly did. But for those who do have faith, I do give all power and glory to God, because it was through that growing faith that I was able to hang on and heal and move on to the next phases of my life.
Amen. Well,
Amen.
let's talk about
Amen.
what you're doing to help people with dissociative identity disorder. You have set up writing workshops and memoir classes. Tell us why you decided to do that and what that does to help them and how it positively affects them.
Yes, thank you. Well, I have started two writers' workshop groups. They're online and they're free. And they're for people with dissociative disorders. And so there are several different dissociative disorders, not just dissociative identity disorder. And so anyone who experiences dissociation in that sense is welcome to be a part of these writers' workshops. Writing can be a healing experience, and it's a way of bringing what's inside of you outside and putting it on the paper. And but when you have this kind of disorder, and when you've experienced so much betrayal, it's often hard to trust people, and it's hard to know how to put your innermost thoughts onto paper. And so in our writers' workshops, they are very, very low key. They're very welcoming and accepting. And people can share their writing, or they cannot share it. They can just listen. And then we give feedback after we've read the writing, and we affirm the writers, we affirm the writing, and we affirm the story behind the writing. And it not only does it help us bring the stories out into the light on paper, but it also builds bonds of trust between the people who attend. And so that's a really wonderful gift for all of them. And you can learn more about the writers' workshops by going to my website. It's www.lynbarrett.com, and that's spelled LynBarrett.com. And you can find out about the writers' workshops. You can also find out, you can read my weekly blogs. You can find out about my book and how you can order that. Our writers' workshops have actually evolved into a group called Dissociative Writers, and we are self-publishing a anthology of dissociative writing in January. We have guest bloggers. We do a number of things to help people in their writing journeys. So anyone who has a dissociative disorder or thinks they may have a dissociative disorder or is friends with or a loved one of someone with a dissociative disorder, I really encourage you to check out my website, because there are some really very helpful tools there for those of us as we're going through this journey of healing. And I would also say, because there are so many, this is sort of the sensational part of dissociative identity disorder that we didn't really talk about. People get really curious about the other personalities or the alters. Sometimes we call them insiders or parts. Our parts saved our lives, really. Even though they sometimes can be difficult for us as adults. And so in the healing process, what we need to do is get to know our parts and believe our parts, even if it's hard to believe the stories they tell. We need to believe them. And that's where writing really helps, because when you write, the parts can write to each other, and it really builds communication. And as our parts, as we get to know our parts better and they get to know each other better, the amnesia walls between them start to lower. And that's how we start to heal. I just mentioned that there are, the treatment that we have leads us to healing. When we get towards the end of healing our symptoms, we often have a choice. Sometimes our parts want to integrate together and become one whole, which is what happened to me. And sometimes our parts choose to stay separate but healthy and collaborative, and we call that functional multiplicity. And so I just wanted to make sure that I noted that there are two endpoints that someone with DID can move towards. The most important thing for us is to heal our symptoms. And then we can decide whether or not we're going to integrate as one or whether we're going to be functionally multiple.
Well, let's talk about your memoir, and you also have a free ebook. So tell listeners about those books, what they can expect when they read them.
Sure. If you go on my website, again, that's www.lynbarrett.com. There will be a pop-up where you can put your email in, and when that happens, it'll take you to a page where you can download the free ebook. It's a very short little book, and it just tells you a little bit about DID and what you might expect if you've recently been diagnosed or if someone you love has been diagnosed. I hope people will feel really comfortable to look at that, because it's very simple. It's not complicated. It's very short, but it gives you an idea of what DID is. My memoir, on the other hand, is a full-length book. And I've mentioned before that the title is Crazy, Reclaiming Life from the Shadow of Traumatic Memory. It really starts in my early 30s when I am living a wonderfully happy life, and then everything falls apart. And so we go back and forth between what's happening now and what happened when I was younger, what's happening now, and what I remember and don't remember from my childhood. And it takes you through my whole healing process. And it's a good read. And I also hope it's educational and inspirational, because I integrated 10 years after I was diagnosed. So, which is really 20 years ago, because I'm 74 years old now. And so for 20 years of my life, the 10 years that led up to my diagnosis and the 10 years after, I was living in constant pain and confusion and unreality. But because I did the therapeutic work that I did, and I kept moving forward, I didn't give up, and I relied on this power that is greater than myself, the power that I call God. And for all of these reasons, I was able to heal, and what a gift, and what a wonder to have been able to heal and to integrate as one person. Now, once I integrated, now the book only goes up to the integration, and then there's a short epilogue that tells about my life after that. None of our lives are perfect, and my life hasn't been perfect, even since integration. But it's been wonderful, and I am so grateful, and I'm happy, and I lead a very fulfilled life. I am so glad that God did not let me die when I attempted suicide. And I'm so glad that I was able to, even though I had suicidal ideation throughout that period of time, I somehow kept myself from attempting that again, because life on the other side is such a gift. And I am here talking to you, Curtis, because I want people to know that no matter what their trials are, even if it's not dissociative identity disorder, that life is a gift, and that there's always another side. We can always get to another side, and not to give up. In the case of dissociative identity disorder, which is an extremely painful disorder, that even with that, there is hope, and there is life.
Well, tell us about the process that you went through writing your memoir and what ultimately made you decide to write it.
Well, I've had an interesting life, and I've even beyond the DID, and I'm a good writer. And so when I was thinking about retiring, Curtis, I kept thinking, well, I should write a book. But when I would try to think about what I would write about, I just got nothing. I would just go blank. I couldn't think of anything to write about. And I thought that was really curious, because I know that I have a lot to write about, and I know that I'm a reasonably good writer. And so I wondered, why is that? Why can't I think of anything to write about? Why do I just sort of go blank at that question? And then I realized that I went blank at that question because I needed to write this book first before I write anything else. That this story had to come out before I could tackle any other topics. So I did start writing in 2014, and I wrote for about 2 years. And actually, I went to a workshop that was called Writing for Healing. And when I read a little bit of what I was writing, somebody was kind of upset that I would speak the way I spoke about a family member. And I just shut down, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to do this. And so for another 2 or 3 years, I shut down, and I never picked it up. But somehow I knew it was still there, and that it was going to come up again. And so I started up again in December of 2018, and it for the next 4 months, it just flowed out of me. And then again, December of 2019, it flowed out of me. So the first draft was finished in April of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. After the first draft was finished, I did 10 more revisions. So I really wanted it to be the best that I could make it. And I revised and I revised. I let friends read it and give me feedback. And I eventually did hire an editor who could actually professionally tell me what was working and what wasn't working. And so I continued to work on it until early last year. And then I began to submit it for publication. And so here we are. And today, the exciting thing is I just got a box of softbound and hardbound copies. It hasn't been published yet. It doesn't come out until January 3rd, but the publisher gets it early. And so if you had video here, I'd pick up a book and show it to you because I'm really excited. But you and your listeners are welcome to check it out on my website and order it if you'd like to. And also to email me on my website, because I'm happy to hear from people and I'd like to know what they think, not just about my memoir, but about their lives as well. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that I'm very accessible.
Tell us about any current or upcoming projects besides your new book that you're working on that people need to know about.
Oh, thank you, Curtis, for asking that question. I just have to say, I've been teaching. I just finished my last class teaching a memoir class for people with dissociative disorders. The last class was just a few days ago. And people asked me there, well, when's your next book coming out? And I said, I just need to get through this one first. So I appreciate your asking me that question. What I can tell you is that my plan is, after I take a rest, is to write a book of meditations for people with dissociative disorders that they can read in the morning or in the evening during a reflective time to help them as they cope with the disorder.
Well, give us some final thoughts to close it out.
Well, my final thoughts are that I'm so glad to be speaking on your podcast and to your listeners. I'm sure they've all heard of dissociative identity disorder, and they have probably been curious about it or wondered about it, or maybe have learned things about it that are not entirely accurate. And so that my hope is that with our conversation, that people will understand the disorder a little bit better, that they will not be afraid of it, that they will understand that they can't fix the person who has DID, but they can be a friend or someone to walk beside them, and they can encourage that person to get appropriate trauma-informed therapy, and that there is life and hope beyond DID, and that to remember that DID is caused by chronic early childhood trauma and abuse. And although it's not fun to end on that note, that is the truth. And we need to, as individuals, as people, and as communities and a nation, face the fact that childhood abuse is rampant, and we need to do everything we can to prevent it. But in the case of DID, we need to do everything we can to support the people who used such a creative coping strategy to cope with an impossible childhood.
Ladies and gentlemen, LynBarrett.com. Please be sure to follow, rate, review, share Lyn's story after listening, because our story could help save lives. Also, Android listeners, go to the Google Play Store and download the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast app. Lyn, thank you so much for joining me today. Your story could help someone.
Thank you so much for having me, Curtis.
For more information on the Living the Dream podcast, visit www.djcurveball.com. Until next time, stay focused on living the dream.